Good morning to everyone, and welcome to the second in the series of Diaspora Interventions and COVID-19. And today's webinar is on mitigating the impact of COVID-19 and leveraging remittances, short and long-term strategies for impact. So welcome to everyone who has been able to join us this morning. You would have seen our list of speakers, and we also have Amadou Cissé, who will be moderating. Amadou is the Executive Director at the African Institute for Remittances, and we will be leaving the moderating in his capable hands. In terms of house rules, for all your Q&As, please do use the Q&A box to ask any questions or to make any inputs as well that you would like to make. If it's possible and if the moderator chooses, we might be able to take one or two live questions, but I will leave that with Amadou to decide, depending on the timing. We will be in the Q&A boxes, we'll be in the chat boxes as well. So please use the chat boxes to have discussions amongst yourselves. But I think for today, we really do want some concrete actions as well. So if you're also able to make an input and suggestions, please do that. I think those are the main house rules. There is a poll that would have gone up as well. We did a few questions as we did the last time, and that is for participants to respond to. So it may still be up for a little bit, so please do make sure that you get your answers in there as well. But otherwise, I will hand over now to Amadou. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Stella. Good afternoon, good morning to everybody. Welcome to this second webinar, the second of a series of 3 webinars, all related to the issue of COVID-19 and mainly the impact of COVID-19 and the action that the diaspora people could be envisaged to help mitigate the impact of the COVID-19. For today's webinar, as you all know, it is about mitigating the impact of COVID-19 and leveraging remittances, short and long-term strategies for Africa mainly. And for this, we have very great speakers that you know already. I will introduce them to in a short while. But before that, we have also to thank those who are organizing this webinar, mainly the AFFORD and the ADEPT, in collaboration with the African Union, mainly the CIDO. We are very pleased to welcome you all to this webinar. And let's get started very quickly with the introductory remarks by Iman from the African Union Commission, mainly the CIDO department. Iman.
Thank you so much, Amadou. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. So my name is Iman Khair. I am the head of the Diaspora Division in the African Union Commission. Well, today I'm here first, like Amadou mentioned, as a partner to this webinar alongside AFFORD and ADEPT, both AU-recognized diaspora networks in Europe, or now we could say in the UK and in Europe, but with another task, which is to give the opening remarks about mitigating the impact of COVID-19 and leveraging remittance short and long-term strategies for impact. I guess with over 5 million cases confirmed worldwide today, we have witnessed firsthand how COVID-19 pandemic amplifies human suffering, economic distress, and is a truly existential threat to humanity. COVID also allowed us to slow down a little bit and rethink many things that we've taken for granted. Today, for example, is Friday for Muslims. It might be the last day of the holy month of Ramadan, with Eid being celebrated tomorrow. They can tell you that during this month and tomorrow, as they celebrate Eid, and Eid Mubarak to all those celebrating, they will tell you that worship exercises of prayers, specifically during the month, and celebrations tomorrow are a very different reality. Most of them individual, many are digital. Businesses, institutions, organizations, including development organizations, have also realized and already indicated that they need to restructure the way they work. So Cambridge University announced that they will not be conducting face-to-face classes until 2021. Oxfam International announced that they will lay off over 1,400 staff and withdraw from 18 countries. Half of them are in African countries. I think for our diaspora, and specifically because I'm managing that division in the AU, and the diaspora, the lifeline of many communities here in Africa, the pandemic provided them with a set of challenges that perhaps they didn't have to face previously. The closure of borders meant that they could not fly to assess their countries of origin, but even for countries that didn't close their borders, the diaspora were torn between supporting their countries of origin or countries that they and their families now reside in. At least with diaspora healthcare workers, many have chosen the latter and continue to be the first line of defenders while trying to support their countries of origin. But this support now looks like knowledge transfer, advice, and remittance. Remittance is the topic of this webinar, has always been referred to as counter-cyclical. But yet again, COVID-19 presents in new realities. It's a global crisis. Sending money home is now a challenge, leading to a drop of remittance, at least in some countries. And when we think of reasons that we can attribute to this, the drop of remittance, we can look at many of the African diasporas are self-employed, working in informal jobs, and which means that now they are unemployed or have their jobs frozen. Also, because money transfer operators had at some point to adhere to the lockdown, and most of those first generation who are the first line of sending these remittances lack the digital literacy that they need to help them use these platforms, online platforms. I guess also if you're a remittance recipient, it is fair to say that your state of well-being is truly affected. If you're unable to receive remittance, it means that your well-being depends on the support you're being given by your own governments. So I think COVID-19 showed us that in 2020, we ought to do things a little bit differently. With the AU, when we look at Agenda 2063, Aspiration 1 says a prosperous Africa based on inclusive growth and sustainable development. For us at the AU, it means that we need to eradicate poverty in one generation and build prosperity in the next generation through social and economic transformation of the continent. And I guess that begs the question that, or pushes us now as the African Union and our partners of international organizations, the government, the donor community, and the diaspora networks to start pioneering programs that look beyond remittance into more sustainable programs to invest in Africa. A great example of this program that the AU is developing is the African Diaspora Investment Fund, a diaspora legacy project that looks at tapping into diaspora savings, at pooling funds for investment in Africa, but also looks at innovative finance that utilizes matchmaking methodology. I'm confident that today's webinar with distinguished speaker, Professor Jibril Fal, Sonia Plaza, Pedro Vasconcelos, and of course, my colleague Amado Cisse, a brilliant moderator, and all the questions from the participants, we will be able to discuss global and regional challenges, solutions, and good practices that are worthy of being emulated across the continent. Thank you for making the time to join our webinar, and I can't wait to start listening to it myself. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Iman. Those words are very welcome. And you address all the issues that we have to discuss today. You have mentioned many of the issues that we have to address today. And our speakers are listening, and I'm sure that in their speeches, they will touch on all some of them that you have mentioned, as well as all the participants. You have mentioned about the global and regional challenges that this COVID-19 is putting on the remittance. And these are issues that we have to discuss, mainly the global, mainly the challenges in the region. But before we get to the region, we have to look at the global issues. And this is why we have here our first speaker, who is Sonia Plaza. Sonia Plaza, that you know from the World Bank, from Nomad. She has been working on remittance for a while, for a long time. And I would like to ask Sonia to tell us what do the world, at the World Bank level, what do you think about this pandemic, its current impact, and also looking forward, what are the medium-term impact as well as the long-term impacts, and how could the international community collaborate together to try to mitigate these issues at a global level, and then also, if possible, for Africa itself. Sonia, welcome, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, and I really, okay, yes, I'm trying to share my screen. Could you please allow me to share the screen to make a presentation? Who is the host of the
Sure.
Of the
Stella, can you address this issue?
Yes, please go ahead.
Yes.
Thank
Thank you, madam. Could you see it?
Not yet.
Okay, now, yes, perfect.
Yes.
Good morning, everybody, and good afternoon. Many thanks to be in this important event with all my friends who are also panelists. We have been working on this topic on migration for a long time. But I would like to emphasize some message as our colleague from the African Union has said. I wanted to also put some challenges for the diaspora in terms of on the remittances and in terms of what we can do to collaborate. And I wanted to give you a little bit a global vision, what is going on. So I am Sonia Plaza, I'm working in NOMAD, which is the Global Knowledge Partnership on Migration and Development. And a lot of the content of this presentation is based on our Migration and Development Brief, number 32, that looks at COVID and remittances from the migration lens. I can send you the link to that report in the chat box. So I'm going to talk four things very quickly. How COVID is compared to other crises before. What are the impacts on migration, as have you requested, Amadou, the impacts on remittances, and one possible policy interventions. As you can see, there are several pandemics or epidemics or crises before, from the Spanish flu, SARS, the swine flu, the MERS, Ebola, COVID-19. In all of these, there were different impacts on GDP, and there are different impacts on the total overall population. And if you can see from the table, the one that all of Vali was talking, it was Spanish flu because it has the largest coverage, it was 25%, but the average change on GDP on the majority, on the growth of the most affected country was only 0.82%, okay? And in the case of Ebola, it was not the overall population of the world, but the GDP impacted of the countries was minus 8.14. However, with the current crisis, that's we have put a question mark, because you have seen around the world the growth forecasts and the GDP growth forecasts are being reduced and revised and revised and revised every day. And then the IMF just came back with a new revisions, and we will continue because this will be a strong crisis. So one thing that I wanted to call to the attention, and this is also part for the diaspora to be prepared, and the important role that we have to play, is that the Spanish flu has two peaks. One that was October, November 2018 on the fall, it started, and then again in the spring, well, in the fall and the spring of 1919. We are expecting similar pattern for this COVID. So I think we have an important role to play also in terms of advocacy and in terms also to be prepared on the measures that we are going to take. People were thinking that, oh, now that everybody can go out of the lockdown, the COVID will disappear. That will not be the case, and we have to be alert on that. So just to look at the context of previous crises, and that's why our colleague from the also African Union was mentioning how remittances have been behaving before, but in the majority of the cases when it was disaster, remittances were counter-cyclical. So we have here the cases of Philippines, When there was the crisis of the bird flu crisis, as you can see, immediately after the bird flu in November 2003, remittances came to the help of the people, remittances increased. When it was the financial crisis, it was a depression, the remittances decreased. But now for COVID-19, we're expecting, and then we have seen also very large decrease for Philippines. So the same for Mexico, as you can see on the financial crisis, the remittances were having a double dip. They decrease, and then after 3 or 4 years, they recover. And now we are seeing for the COVID, although the March numbers they have released, there's a huge increase on remittances. This is due to the devaluation of the peso that is in the lowest levels. It has devaluated a lot, and a lot of savings going on. So we know the numbers. 3 things to remember. Migrants are an important number on 272 million of the large population, and then we have also the refugees. All of us, we talk migrants, we talk the diaspora, but we haven't talked very little about also of the refugees. And the refugees to receiving remittance, the situation is very dire. One point to make it, and this is in related how the diaspora first generation and second generation and how the migrants are going to be faced, we are in a worse situation than before. When it was the economic crisis in 2007, 2008, if you look at the unemployment levels of the foreign born, were 11.1, and but in Spain and in Italy, the unemployment rates, the diaspora was employed. They were doing very good. What happened after that, the crisis? It jumps, the unemployment level jumps. And now, before in 2018, before even starting the crisis, the unemployment levels, we never recovered before the pre-crisis in 2007. So we are in worse situation. And in the case of Spain and Italy, the unemployment is still the double to was in 2007. So we are starting the COVID crisis. So the COVID crisis had hit with a worse situation in employment for the diaspora. So this will have long and lasting effects. Now, what we have forecast, and this is the numbers that have been all over in the world. Our forecast estimates that the remittance flows to low and middle income countries are expected to decline by 20%. Now, we wish we are wrong on the estimates. By the contrary, I think that the numbers also will be revised a little bit down because the situation is not coming, but it's 20%. Now, this is due to what? Economic recession that is going to happen globally because it's not only on the receiving countries, it's in the sending countries, it's impacting the sectors where the migrants are the most. And it's also impacted by the falling of oil prices. This is especially for the Gulf countries and Russia, and then a lot of exchange rate changes that we have seen. So if you can see, remittance is expecting to come back 20%, and all the flows. So foreign direct investment is going to go down. It has already been leaving. A lot of the investors, all of us, we are talking about the export promotion zones. Several of the investors, for example, in one country in Ethiopia have already left. So FDI will plunge, and then ODA will be reduced because countries will be concentrating more in their native population. And also remember that under some of the conventions we have to, the ODA is a certain percentage of the GDP. The GDP will be contracted in the developed countries, so the percentage of the ODA also will be smaller. And then the portfolio flows will be completely fluctuating. So I think that still remittances have an important role to play, but we are expecting 20% decline. So in our global projections, we see that all the regions on the world will be highly impacted. And for Africa, we are expecting minus 23.1%. And for Europe and Central Asia, minus 27.5%. And all of the countries are going to expect a huge, huge decline on the remittance. So this is the numbers. We have come out with this. And this will severely impact, especially the countries that depend a lot on GDP. No, the remittance is important as an important percentage of the GDP. We have that, for example, for South Sudan is 30% of the GDP. how it's going to be impacted. Then on top of that, we have Somalia, it's 30% of percentage of GDP. Now, the most dire situation is the one that we have in Africa, and that we have to pay attention because there are several concurrent crises. It's not only COVID. We have in East Africa and the Horn Africa, the locust, which is incredible. And then you have their own recession also on their own countries, plus the floods, plus the drought. So this is the time that before, when there was any disaster, remittances came and helped them. That happened in the previous drought crisis in 2017 for Somalia, that the diaspora played an important role in helping the disaster, or when the Ebola. But now the migrants and the diaspora who send remittances are also impacted. So how we're going to deal with these issues, how we are going to support our countries. Now, the other point is remittances cost. All of us would say in this time of crisis, the remittances cost has to be reduced. We are working on that for time to progress, but you have seen these numbers are the first quarter of March. These numbers doesn't take into consideration the impact of COVID because the lockdown measures started in several countries in the second part of March. As you can see, we are very far away to reach the 3% by 2030. And Africa is even larger. And these are average numbers. Now, this is March. Let me tell you what is going on now. This is some numbers that our colleagues in my other department of the World Bank have put together, and you can see in the remittances price database. For certain countries, and especially Somalia, remittances cost has increased. Now they have calculated with the week number 2, week number 4, week number 6. They have calculated, they have calculated.
Hello, Sonia. Hello. Hello, Stella, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. I think
I can't, I'm trying to unmute Sonia, but it's not letting me. So I think something's happened on Sonia's end at the moment.
Sonia, if you are hearing us, it looks like you are muted.
Yeah, I can't unmute it from this end, so I don't know why. She may have dropped off, but she's back.
Yes, I think
she did. I've seen it before, so I think it's dropped off and then go. It shows like but unmuted. Yeah.
Amadou, I think we'll hand back to you perhaps to carry on.
Yeah, let's see if we can try to carry on to the next speaker. So if she's back, she will have the opportunity to continue her presentation. So maybe Estella, you should just try to call her or send her an email and then inform her about that. So Sonia was trying to give us the full picture of what is happening at the global level, and then to show that they have focused decrease of remittance in almost all the regions, and the fall of remittance in Africa would be 23%. This COVID-19 crisis is happening in a context where we have some other impact, some other economic challenges which are related to the fall of the oil prices, and also it comes with its own specificities as it impacts also those who are sending remittances. And this happened also in a context where on the continent we have new initiatives that are going on. Among those initiatives we have the Prime Africa. And one of the leaders of the Prime Africa, let's say the main leader of the Prime Africa is Pedro. Pedro will try to, yes, discuss the global issues, but also what has been done in the context of Africa and mainly in the Prime Africa projects. Pedro, is from IFAD, as you all know. Pedro, you have the floor.
Thank you, Amadou. Nice to see you. Nice to see many of you. Sound check. Can you hear me well?
Yes, we can.
Okay, perfect.
Go ahead.
No, thank you. Again, thank you for this opportunity. There's a lot to see. There's a lot to discuss. So we really welcome this type of webinars and initiatives. I think it's great. One of the main things that we have seen, like all of us, when this thing started is the lack of information that exists. We all suddenly sought for so much information to try to figure out, and we realized that that didn't work. And the answer has been all getting together and trying to share as much as we know, be it from hints, be it from anecdotal information. But we, little by little, I think we were able to get a full picture. So I also thanks for the World Bank and Sonia for their overview, which I think really brings the big picture to us to understand how this at the global impact, how this is impacting at the global level. However, what I want to say is that oftentimes when we look at the macro issues, we need to see where the devil is hiding. And this is why maybe I would like to bring the micro level here so we can understand. Let me just illustrate this. We say 23% or 20% decrease. That doesn't mean that a family, instead of 100 euros, receives 80. That means that some will not receive, some might continue, some due to foreign exchange play might be receiving a bit more. But what we're seeing overall is that there's at the individual level, at the family level, what we call remittance families, there is already a shock. And I will illustrate this from what we're seeing also on the ground, as Mamadou said, from the projects on Prime, but also projects elsewhere. So I'm just to make sure that I have the right time. On the challenges, as Sonia was mentioning, and I think as many of you say, there's been many structural issues, lockdowns, remittances not being deemed essential services. We never thought of that because we never had a crisis like this. We had many, but this is the first time that it really hit two sides of the sending and receiving side at the same time. And dealing with the lockdown, well, we were caught unprepared. It would be a crime not to be prepared again for the next time that this happened. So the call for preparedness is it is not just only a medical one, but I think it's a financial one that is absolutely necessary. So we saw that. I mentioned the lack of data. We try. I think, and this is also to the purpose of this webinar. This is where collaboration is so much needed. I mean, we've been collaborating also with diaspora organizations that brought us so much information to IFAD, but also to other type of partners, and vice versa. And I think the sharing of information and the collaboration has been key. I'm trying to bring it on the positive side of what we've learned, because I think we all know that the negative sides. So I think this is important. I would like is just to bring the two sides, the sending and the receiving. On the sending, as we saw, unemployment has hit. The equation is very simple and sad. Not being with the COVID being locked down, not being able to telework for the majority of migrant workers, that just implies no income. No income means or will end up being no remittances. In the meantime, savings can help, but this is just temporary. And I think we believe that this is what we're seeing in the graphs, that from March to May, what we're seeing might also include that counter-cyclical phenomenon of remittances, because you're supporting your loved ones back home. But as we go, we will see the dire reality of what this unemployment might mean. On the receiving side, this is hardly felt. So no incomes, no jobs, no income, no remittances, or fewer. This is a reality that we're dealing with now. And on the receiving side, as you know, on average, we say that remittances correspond to 60% of income of the families that receive them. But again, this is just an average. In many countries, we know that it's much more. Not in many countries, in many remittance families, we know that this could be much more or less. And this, I think, is the important aspect where remittances really are a lifeline. And right now, the price of that, plus the impact that this crisis has at the local economy level, just adds to it. So it is something that really not only requires a global response, but a combination of all local, national, and global responses to try to mitigate. Because I think this is what we're all talking about, mitigate the impact of this crisis, and every effort I think counts. On the receiving end, just to share some of the perspectives that we've seen both in Asia or in Africa, not only at the international level of remittances, but at the domestic level, the unemployment has just sent people back to their cities, many of them in rural areas. So rural areas having to absorb now unemployed, either international migrants, adding to the difficulty about particularly in areas of high migration. The situation is really dire because, again, we're talking literally what we're seeing in many of our regions of work. We're having a looming food crisis coming in. And it's not just about people not being able to buy food with their remittances, it's also about the small holders not even to buy seeds. So the ramification, the radiation of this really that to be found. So what can we do overall? I think again, I just want to congratulate all the efforts that have been done. We are in this because with ADEPT we started discussing. We all joined. We launched a task force to try to get all the perspectives together. Not just a task force from one group that we all know what to do, but to really bring different groups with different views together and trying to put a set of priorities. How can we address immediate needs right now and start thinking about preparedness? I'm happy to say that this is a group of 35 organizations, public, private sector, and civil society inclusive, and we're all working very hard in trying to bring this messages that not only would allow to mitigate the aspects of the crisis right now, but also prepares, as it was said. If we learn from history, there's come and goes on this type of crisis, and if God forbid something happens in the fall, we should be prepared for this. And there's a lot of recommendations that actions that the public sector could take. There's a big list that is being declared right now or studied. The same thing from the private sector. This is the time where the private sector really needs to bring on their innovation. We know we care a lot about the cost, but the cost nevertheless remains just one thing, a barometer on how things are going. And I think Sonia demonstrated very well. The barometer is showing that right now it is not easy as well for the remittance market, and it's not easy for their customers. So we need to motivate and stimulate more innovation. We've seen digital coming up big time. Great. However, it's not just says, let's all switch to digital. If you try right now to cash out in many rural areas of Africa, you're going to have a big problem if you don't have an ATM or somebody that can cash it out. Because with your e-wallet, in many places, and particularly in rural areas, you will not be able to use that digital credit that you might have. You need to cash it out. This brings other structural problems, which now at least puts the priority on trying to address this. So there's some good to it. It might give us focus, refocus on the things that need to be prioritized right now. So there's a lot of these things that I believe that are happening, and I believe it's also important is to keep order. And I think this dialogue with the international organizations, public sector, private sector, civil society is helping also adjust our notes, adjust our definitions and our priorities. For instance, we need a clear delineation in what we mean by remittances and what we mean by diaspora investments, being of coming from the same source, but being two different concepts. I think this is important as we look with the public sector in trying to create, not harmonize, but enhance maybe some of the regulations that can facilitate remittances, as well as different ones to try to promote, for instance, the diaspora investment. We have projects on crowdfunding. The idea is fantastic, it works. The only problem is in some of the sending countries, the regulations just don't allow it to a certain extent. These need to be looked upon. So I think the differentiation about the sectors that we're working on our ideas is absolutely important. And I think this crisis has brought us together in doing that. So we're very happy about that. I will just finish maybe my intervention by saying what this crisis is showcasing is there's not much new. We knew remittances were important, but actually we know that they were more than important. These graphs that the World Bank showed just highlighted even more. For many countries on the G77, it is something that, yes, we recognize is important, but they're there. So let's not fix what is already there. Well, I think the absence right now, they're shining from their absence, or at least their reduction, and that's building more of a case on how crucial these are. And we should all work eventually to a world where they're not needed anymore, because this would be very good news. If migrating for remittances could be, again, a choice rather than a necessity, that means that things are well at home. And this is what we all should aspire to. But there's a lot that is going on. The Global Compact on Migration, its implementation is more important than ever today. It is more important than ever to address, you know, for many of you, for instance, the general principles of the World Bank might seem like a boring thing, but these are crucial, and the governments need to take it very seriously because they matter a lot. And it's 1 billion people that are involved. It's 500 billion, over 500 billion. Even with the reduction, we are in almost $500 billion of contribution from people to their families back home. It's very difficult for everybody to know how many zeros there is in there, but it's really significant. And I think there's always things that can come out of bad things. And I think this is the positive aspect of this crisis, is if we can really work now as one, as at the UN we try to promote, and with the civil society, the public sector and the private sector, I think we can get ready, we can push for preparedness, we can address the immediate needs, and really start looking at this in a different way, combine our actions and the value added of each. I know this seems like a very generalistic message at the end, but it's, if you think of it, is the reality. It's a wake-up call that we all received over the last month. And I will just finish by saying there's more information that we all sharing, and we will gladly share also some of the information that we have collected through briefs that gives examples of what we've seen, not only in Africa, the realities that are being lived now by millions of migrants and their families in Africa, in Asia, for instance, or in Latin America, but most importantly, the best practices. Governments, there are best practices right now, things that were thought that cannot be done, and governments did it. There's the same thing that the private sector has done. And I think these deserve a lot of focus, and we hope that from today and the next webinar that you're doing and that we're all going to be doing, we're preparing one where we hope to see you all at the International Day of Family Remittances, where we would like to share as well all these best practices, hopefully to inspire many more of acting as one. So Amadou, I'll leave it at here, and maybe I can contribute more details as we go in the questions and answers. Back to you.
Thank you so much, Pedro. Thank you for your intervention. Thank you so much. Thank you for your intervention. You have mentioned so many issues, important issues with regard to this crisis. And then when you said that this has hit the two sides, and then it is very, very clear here that if you have impact on those who send, but also those who receive. And as you mentioned, it is very clear that we have to move from the macroeconomic analysis to the microeconomic analysis that will take us to those who receive, who are the family themselves, and then look at what is happening at that level. So then we can address the issues at that level. In the discussions, we'll come back to that, to those actions that needs to be taken at different levels and how to address them. Before we move to our third speaker, let's go back to the first speaker. That was Sonia. Sonia, are you back with us? Hello, Sonia.
It doesn't look like Sonia's sound is there, so I'm not 100% sure that she's fully on the call. So you might want to continue until a microphone appears.
Okay, thank you so much. So after Sonia Plaza, who gave us a very broad overview of remittances in the at the global level, and the context, the economic context in which we have this crisis. We have heard Pedro, who has also given us a very broad idea of what is happening on remittances on the continent, but also what they have collected in terms of data and all these things, and also the nature of this crisis. Let's go back to now one of the key speakers here, which is Jibril, that you all know. Jibril, we will take this opportunity to really question you, and then hoping to get the answers to those questions, because you have several hats here. But what is more important for us here is your hat as also member of the diaspora, facing the same issues, and then knowing very well how the diaspora people are affected, and probably knowing very well also how the people back home in Africa are affected. We know that, but we also would like to know, as to address the main issue or the main questions here in this webinar, what are the immediate actions from the diaspora to mitigate, to address the immediate impact, which is at different levels that you may want to address. Jibril, you have the floor.
Okay. Thank you very much, Amadou, and thank you and Iman for the general introduction. Amadou, my first sense after the presentations, especially from Sonia and hearing from Pedro, is how bleak and how miserable everything seemed to be. And I'm forced to try to think of a more optimistic way to motivate myself and everyone else. And I remember what a friend once told me, that what is the worst that can happen to a human? That is, you have a miserable life and die a miserable death. And then you meet your Lord and he says, off you go to hell. But he says, even in hell, you would meet the coolest people you've ever known. All the musicians and artists and all the creatives are in hell waiting for you. So there's a silver lining that we have to look out for. One other positive that I take from Pedro's point is he asked, and that's a very important point. He said, we're talking of remittances, 500 billion. How many zeros are even in that? Think about that. That's 11 zeros, 11 zeros. So that's a big, big thing. Now, on the question of what do we do in mitigation, I think the question is specific, both in the short term and in the longer term. What do we do? I think we are all, at least because the pandemic doesn't discriminate in detail, it still discriminates. As you know, at a medical level, African and Black and minority ethnic, especially in Europe, are more affected. We don't know whether that is physiological or whether that's sociological. But the point to make is, even though as a pandemic, it emphasizes the global links, the elements of these inequalities are also present. So we need to be mindful of that all the time. What unites us is that almost everyone from every sector realizes that this is the time we have to get together, and some of the things that we've been complacent about for a long time, perhaps this is the opportunity to pick it up. I think it is true, as commented by many people, that we are in circumstances that would change the way we live forever. So this is the moment for transformation. Relating to the actions we can take, they inevitably have to be anchored around policy and practice. And policy in terms of government, in this panel alone, I am very pleased that we have the AU, we have AIR and AU institution, we have the World Bank, we have IFFORD, which is a UN institution. So we also have seen governments play a very good participatory and inclusive role throughout. So let us keep that unity. Let us build on the opportunities that unity provides for us. Then to be specific, what can we do from that policy advantage of unity to get some practical actions that would help immediately and in the long term? And if you drill down, you find that we're talking of 2 or 3 main things. One, how can we use ODA? So we now come to the crude matter of money and the practicalities of actions. How do we use ODA for some of the mitigation that we're thinking about? How do we use market regulations to facilitate some of the mitigations we're talking about? I'm going to make 3 specific suggestions relating to actions we can take now, immediate mitigation, and then talk about longer term investment in resilience. And that would bring us a link between immediate, which is the remittances, to diaspora investment, which is more longer term. But in a way, diaspora investment is a form of remittance substitution, because people who invest in their country of origin and heritage tend to use monies that are generated locally to pay for the things that they would have paid for through remittances. So investment in that sense is a form of remittance and substitution. In terms of immediate actions, what to mitigate, some of the ideas that have come through, and it has been on the discussions we've all had globally over the past 6 weeks, a good part of it convened through AFFORD's PRIME project, in which many of us have been participating and having those discussions. I mentioned 3 things. Number 1, the recognition of remittances and remittance businesses as an essential service in times of pandemic restrictions. Number 2, structural actions to reduce the cost of remittances. And number 3, collective funding or match funding of collective remittances in the times of pandemic, unemployment, and lower income. In relation to recognizing remittances as an essential service, as both Sonia and also Amadou in your intro and Pedro mentioned, many diaspora find it difficult to go out and send out remittances because we were in lockdown. You would have seen the news that in the UK, AFFORD specifically did brilliant work, link up with the Department for International Development and the House of Lords, and the law was changed. And money service businesses were recognized as essential services, just as food shops, meaning that they can open. So that is something that can be done everywhere, that remittance money service businesses should be recognized as essential services. And I would encourage ADEPT to pick up that in terms of coordinating with other European countries that have not moved in that level. And of course, AFFORD at a global level to try to get that recognition across the world. So immediately what can be done, I think that remains an important one. And as noted before, although there would be significant drive towards digital platforms for remittances and fintech, the reason why one must not rule out the physical cash-based economy is because, again, the most vulnerable are the ones who do not necessarily have those digital platforms. So it is important that we leave those options open. The correlation to that is in the West or the global North, we've been talking about getting rid of cash altogether and checkbooks. I remember in the UK about 10 years ago, a decision was made that checks would not be accepted anymore by banks. But that had to be stopped because a very important vulnerable group, that is older people, wanted to continue using cash and checks. And it is important that that was kept. So I just mentioned that we bear that in mind, that in moving digital, we still keep the platforms ready for face-to-face and for, especially for the most vulnerable. Relating to the second point of cost reduction, In fact, I'm struck from Sonia's presentation to find that the cost of transfers have been going up significantly in different corridors. And this, of course, is extremely worrying. Not only it reverses sort of some of the advances gained, but the mega resources of the diaspora is being spread out and taken out. And of course, the diaspora has an interest in a vibrant and strong money transfer business sector. We want them to remain in business. So overall, it's very worrying, which makes it more important that policy and public policy and public intervention comes in to deal with the cost of remittances. And we have suggested before, and I think IFFORD through the Remittance Community Task Force is picking this up, about a major advocacy on asking governments to use ODA and other money to come in structurally to support the subsidization of remittance costs, which means it's a benefit to the money transfer businesses. And I say yes to that because we need those businesses. They are our intermediaries. We don't like them exploiting us, but we need that industry to be vibrant. And that structural support would help them in business, and it is a direct benefit to the remitter as well, because the cost would remain low. I would even take the opportunity to say, let's do that with ambition, not only to counter what has surprised me, that is the costs are going up, but actually to move positively towards the target 10.7C of reducing cost to not more than 3% as set up in the Sustainable Development Goals. And the third suggestion is relating to collective remittance match funding. As the diaspora's income goes down through unemployment or other worries, and as problems in Africa and developing countries economically also grow, the disparity between those who have remitters, meaning 60% of household income coming from them, the disparity is at risk of growing bigger. And as I've mentioned in another forum, it is unlikely to be feasible to ask governments in the UK, in Europe, in the United States, to use the same process they're using to subsidize the wages of the general working population. It is unfeasible and unlikely to ever happen for us to say to them also subsidize our remittances. So that's unlikely to happen. But we can say this is the time to encourage and increase collective remittances, which in the total volume of remittances is still a relatively small part. And it is important because this is the one that does not go necessarily directly just to our families and our friends, it goes to communities. It may be physical communities as in a village, or it may be communities of interest as in young people, single mothers, disabled people, or other groups. So this area, we've already seen a lot of activity among the diaspora developing these collective funding remittances. A whole lot, hundreds of GoFundMe projects have come up that way, whereby people are now taking part of their family remittances to contribute to these collective remittances. And I think this can be developed more. And one way to incentivize it and develop it is for those funds to be matched by ODA money. So those are the three practical suggestions I have for immediate mitigation. So if we go to the next part, that is how do you mitigate in the long term? This, I think, overall is about getting mechanisms to invest in things that allow, that brings the link between remittances and investment, which brings also tapping into diaspora savings. The opportune thing is that many of the thinking around this, which has been around for 15 years now, is just crystallizing. It so happens that the African Union, which have had a commitment to work around diaspora investment for a long time, in the past year has made significant efforts to bring into practice that African Diaspora Investment Fund. I have the privilege to be working with Iman and the AU in this in 2018 and 2019. And one of the ideas we've put in there is the old idea of remit aid. That is, remittance match funding can be adopted and incorporated in the Africa Diaspora Investment Force program as an innovative form of finance. Somebody, one of the speakers mentioned before, that somehow many of the problems we're talking about are some things that we knew before and we understand, only that COVID-19 have brought the urgency to it. And there are two of those problems that I want to highlight and suggest how the long-term solution can look. One is the remittances are consumptive in nature, so they do not have a financial regenerative element. Second, that the remittances are disaggregated. They are individual sums of 300, 400 pounds here. There is no element of pooling. So with this innovative finance approach, which now the African Union has endorsed as part of its legacy project coming from the 2012 Global African Diaspora Summit, declaration of the heads of states of the African Union, you can now begin to do that. You pool whatever the equivalent of what would have been a tax relief or match funding, you invest it, so you have a degree of long-term funds that can grow into a form of endowment funds, and out of the income, you use that to invest in what I would call generally resilient and self-help industries. So COVID-19 have flagged up big time what resilience industries are. Number one would be food and agriculture. So investment in food and agriculture, whereby not necessarily self-sufficiency, but food security in the most technical understanding of it can be enforced, can be reality for the most vulnerable and the low-income countries. Second would be investment in health systems. This also is not a new recognition, but COVID-19 has brought it, the urgency to us in a most rude and uncomfortable manner. And third, I would say, would be on jobs and sustainable jobs. So if we are able to do that, in the UN Financing for Development Office already recognizes this match funding methodology as a form of innovative finance. As I said, the AU have endorsed it. Institutions from the World Bank, in fact, to many of the players in this field, understand the importance of it. And everyone is now together in recognizes the urgency and the interconnectedness. I think that can be one of many approaches towards a longer term answer to the negative effects of pandemics and other global crises that hit humanity. I would pause here and thank you. And of course, we'll get to the Q&A later. Thanks, Amal.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Jibril. You have mentioned, you have discussed two issues which are related to the short term and the long term. We have concrete proposals that you have put on the table. And then in the long term, you have mentioned this very critical project for the African Union, which is the African Development, the Diaspora Investment Fund, which you have been privileged to work on with Iman and all the colleagues at the African Union Commission. Hopefully that this fund will be very soon operational. And the other thing that you have mentioned is that there are some, and we have some questions for you about that. We'll come back to you. It is about the actions at the senders on the sender side mainly in terms of collective remittance and all these things. You already have a question about that. Please be ready, get ready to answer the mechanisms, how it works, how you think that it should work, and how it could contribute to mitigate the impact now. We have Sonia back. Let us give her the opportunity to finalize her presentation. Sonia, are you okay now?
I'm mute. Yeah. Do you hear me well?
Yeah, please. If you can just elaborate further, then we can.
Okay. So, do you know where I do you know where I stopped? Because I finished for myself. I finished my where I stopped.
Sorry. You were discussing. We lost the signal when you were presenting the cost, and then you were showing that the cost of sending remittance, comparing $100 to $200, that it has already increased. That's where you start. We miss you. If you could really just.
Perfect. Okay, and this gives me an opportunity to hear very well Jibril. So we are aligned in our message. So this is good. So let me share with you and then signal me if in case we have a problem. Yeah. Thank you, Madhu. Thank you, everybody, for their patience. Okay, perfect. So I was saying that one thing that we were saying when we were comparing 100 and 200 is that given the crisis, the prices for 100 is going to become the more relevant. Because if you go to, for example, I go normally to where the Mexicans or the Central American go, they go weekly and they're going to try to send even the minimum. They're going to be sending 100. So if sending 100 is becoming more expensive, and even 200 is becoming expensive than was before, we are not in a good situation. So that's why it's important that we work on remittances cost. Now, on the suggested policy responses and how we can go, a lot of this coincides with what Jibril and Pablo, what they have been saying. But look at this. Short term, nobody has been talking and supporting the stranded migrants. We have a lot of stranded migrants in Africa and in Europe. So if it's possible, some of the countries are trying to evacuate, but it's going to be difficult. Grant temporary protection status to foreign nationals. We need a lot of health awareness campaigns and the provision of treatment to migrants and support informal business employee migrant workers. Then in social services, we have to try to give access to health service, education, and housing. Extend cash transfer program to support internal and international migrants. This is very difficult. If you have seen in the measures that several countries have issued, none of them include migrants. Only Portugal has been given something, even the ones that are applying to the residency, they can have the access to health. And at the national level, at the local level, at the municipalities, also in the United States, that undocumented migrants are able to get some of the services. But in the government programs, the cash transfer programs are not supporting neither internal, neither international migrants. Then we have to look also at support social services and provide cash transfers to families left behind. This is in our own countries. Now, what happens several times is that when they say, oh, this family used to receive remittances, they don't qualify, but they're not going to be receiving remittances. So it's important that we also advocate that people that even they receive remittance, they will be in a very dire situation. Then facilitate the provision of remote mentoring and medical advice by diaspora. Ethiopia diaspora is tapping to their doctors. This happened in the Ebola case, the Liberian diaspora and the Sierra Leone. They were doing videos and join every week to give the advice. So I think this is an important thing. And in terms of supporting remittances infrastructure, Jibril has already mentioned, we have to make remittances service providers should be declared as essential services. It has been declared in the UK. In other countries, still some of them they are doing. For example, but in the United States, it cannot be at the federal, it has to be at the state. In my country, and this has to be not only on the sending countries, but in the receiving countries. I'm from Peru, and in my country, all the agents are closed, And the only way that you can receive remittances or pick up the remittances is in the banks that are open. So you have an account or you have an agency. But example, do you really need this? I have a friend who is more than 80 years old and the poor lady cannot go out of her house. How is going to receive remittance? This is other thing that we were talking about, the subsidize the cost of sending money to reduce burden of remittances fee. And this is more in line also what Jibril was saying on ODA. And then one of the things that we have to continue working is on the AMLF CFT requirements. They, for the time being, could be temporarily simplified. Some countries are trying, but it's very difficult, especially for doing EKYC on onboarding. How we simplify, incentivize online and mobile money transfer. How we can follow a risk-based approach. And on this, I wanted to agree with Jibril has said. Everybody is talking like digital remittance with this panel. Digital remittances are great, but a large percentage of the migrants will not be able to move to digital remittances. And it's not only because they don't have the skills or they don't know how to do it. It's only also because there's a lot of KYC requirements, and there's a lot of requirements to have a bank account and to have a debit account. And just to I send remittances to Peru and I go to the supermarket in cash money. What happened to me when I was trying to move to mobile remittances?
Hello, Sonia. I don't know if it's the case for everybody. It looks like you are breaking up. Other participants, are you able to hear?
Yeah, I'm here. Do you hear me?
Okay. Yes, you are breaking up.
Yeah. Okay, no. Now is it okay?
That's fine. You can carry on, yes.
Yes, so $64, it took 4 days to arrive to Peru, $64, okay? So if there's an emergency, they cannot keep it. So there are some constraints, but then that's why I'm saying that for the all population, for the undocumented population, for the people who use the cash, it's going to be very difficult. And I agree that we cannot force. We can try to do the digital remittance, is the best thing, but we have to consider also the other people who are not going to be that. And then mitigated factors that prevent customers or service providers of digital remittances. No, we were talking about the interoperability, access to payment systems. In the medium term, this is one of the products that we have to think, how we revisit insurance regulations so that migrants can be able to buy medical insurance for families back home, how to make medical insurance benefits portable. This is the health issue, is important and we have to think about it. It was an issue, but now come out at the top of the agenda. And then on supporting remittances infrastructure, we need to put data on migration and remittance. At this moment, you have to see how difficult it is to get this data. We don't have data even by the different channels. We have no data along the whole value chain. And I am inviting all of you to contribute to the international working group to improve remittances data that NOMAD has settled. So because we need to work with these governments and to improve and have better data in order to issue the best policies. Reduce remittances cost. Again, Jibril has mentioned this. Can we work on reducing remittances cost? We have to continue and then facilitate digital remittances and improve financial access on receiving and sending countries. And then on the more long term, we are trying to support safe and regular migration. This is one of the things that I was saying. We have to train more doctors and nurses in low and middle income countries in collaboration with medical schools in high income countries. This is part of the diaspora and this can be also part of the African Union. Because even last week I was in a presentation and they mentioned that already several countries have already gone to Nigeria and to Kenya to recruit more doctors. Then we have to balance between the brain drain and with how we train more people so we have prepared for the health pandemic. We need to continue the efforts to reduce the recruitment costs and then establish universal health programs so everybody can be insured. And then finally, support to efforts to reduce remittances costs. But more in the longer term, and Jibril has put very nicely what we can do on the remittances cost. We can talk about reducing remittances cost. We can try to mobilize the collective remittances, and we can try to develop some products for longer term on diaspora. But the world has changed completely. We are in a different world, and then us as a diaspora and us as an international organization, I think that we have to think broader. And broader than remittances, and help our countries to prepare for the after COVID. So on that one, we have to work a lot on the skills. Not only digital skills, but reskilling and skilling. Like Jibril has said, they are different in resilience industries. Yes, what are the resilience industries? It's health, it's agriculture, will continue, but also it's a lot of the things that we will move into more digital. So reskilling and reskilling, how we can become resilient. And then look at the mobility channels. Student mobility is important, but several countries are putting also barriers and say that students cannot be staying after they finish their work. And another thing that has always been in the agenda, and now it came out very strongly, was the recognition of skills, no? And the brain gain. A lot of the doctors were not recognize their skills, they don't recognize, and now when they need it, this is the time to do, and we continue working on those issues. And in terms of strategies, this is my last slide, and in terms of strategies, we were talking how we can use remittances. Remittance has always served as an insurance, but an insurance, more we are focused, oh, there's a disaster, there's a drought, there's a flood, let's send remittances. But the cost of sending remittances, when the disaster, when the pandemic has happened, is triple, quintuple. It's cheaper if we invest in preparedness, in crisis prevention, okay? So that's why we have to focus, develop products where remittances can be used for preparedness and crisis prevention. What could be insurance products? An example, I'm working in a project for livestock insurance. So remittances can be helped to use to buy livestock insurance. So this will prevent that that there's the locust ahead of the flood or ahead of the drought, we can have some insurance for this product. And it's the same also on health. We have to develop some insurance product that remittances can acquire this insurance product. Then we have to develop more digital financial products for investment. I think that we have to move that. The African Union Diaspora Investment Fund is very good, but then we can try to mobilize digital financial products for the migrants and for the refugees. And we have to continue reducing the remittances cost. One big barrier for Africa is the ID. There are not even basic IDs, and there's no digital IDs. This impede the KYC, this impede a lot of the use of the mobile money, a lot of the use of all the new products. And this is not only, everybody said we are trying to do this in West Africa, we're trying to do in East Africa, but example, Somalia. Do you think that they have a digital ID? Not yet. They are working on that, and that does have serious issues by MLCFT. Somalia, remittances 30%. IDs for refugees, or IDs for all the Somalis that are in Kenya, IDs for all the refugees that are in Uganda. They don't have a digital ID, so they cannot open an account because there's not recognized as on the KYC, so they cannot, it's very difficult for them. So there's something that we have to work in the short term. Interoperability, look how much are the costs I showed you is in between South Africa, and there's about Africa, if we wanted to discuss about the digital economy, there's no interoperability even about continental Africa for payments. So the payment system, interoperability of the telecoms company, interoperability of all the payment systems infrastructure, and we have to increase competition. And by my final word of caution is, we are in this world, there's a lot of cash transfers. We have to be, how do you say, alert, because this can give a lot of issues in terms of on the corruption side and how the money is given. So I think that, as in any crisis, we have a huge opportunity to leverage remittances and to facilitate diaspora contributions, and we have to take into that. But Jibril mentioned 3 areas, and I think that that's why I'm trying to also to mention food security, farming, and agriculture. is very important. And we have not been working. The diaspora has a lot to contribute in science and technology and agricultural practice, but also on the remittances and the type of product that we can afford. There's a lot of work that we can do in investment products along the value chain on agricultural products. I haven't seen many, very few. That's one of the areas that the Diaspora Investment Fund can put it, African Union. I think that you have a great opportunity there. Then in terms of health, also, if you see how many ICU units, I was looking at the numbers on Somalia, they have, I think, 3 respirators. In other countries, they don't have respirators for dealing with this. We have not been investing in the healthcare. There's no coverage. That's the role also for the Diaspora Investment Fund, how we can try to provide health insurance and how we can work on the hospitals and the doctors. And finally, is the issue of the e-commerce, e-trade, if the diaspora can facilitate, because if there's not going to be mobility, if we have to increase the jobs of all the population in Africa, how we're going to do it if there's not going to be mobility? At least in the next 2 years, migration is going to be a little bit stopped. They're going to be requiring the immunity passport. They're going to be requiring Malaysia, put it yesterday, for example, that you have to have a letter saying that you have 2 weeks of money. So you're going to be doing you're going to be locked down in quarantine, but you have to have all that money. So I think that that will be a very important. Thanks. I finished.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Sonia. Thank you for these insights about the crisis in Africa, but also the crisis in the world, globally in general. We have just concluded 3 presentations from these 3 great presenters, and they have mentioned so many issues, so many important issues. Definitely we won't be able to discuss all of them. We are going to take questions, but before that, allow me to just give the floor to Karin, because there are very important announcements for the participants, and then we carry on. Karin, can you talk about this call for action?
Well, thank you very much, Amadou. Thanks to the speakers for their very insightful contributions, and thanks to the attendees for being present with us today. So indeed, this morning we have been contacted by the Swiss Agency for
Maybe I did not introduce Karin. Karin is our host today. Karin, could you please introduce yourself? Because
yeah, I'm sorry, indeed. So I'm Karin Sudu, the Executive Director of ADEPT. And so I was saying that the Swiss Agency for Development and Cooperation reached out to us to let us know that at 2 p.m. They would jointly with DFID issue a call for action to policymakers, to regulators, and also to money transfer providers, operators, to encourage them, to push them to facilitate the flow of remittances. It shows that collective action is needed in order to mitigate the impact of COVID-19 on remittances. And they will issue a press release. They will forward it to us, and it will then be distributed to all the participants as a follow-up. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much for this announcement, Karin. Hopefully that the call for action will be really very successful, because it is important for now that everybody is involved in this remittance, in the remittance industry, so that to allow business to carry on, to go on, and then to provide services to the migrants and the diaspora in general. Here we have used 2 words, migrants and diaspora. There are some concerns here that are raised by Martin, which would like to recall that these are 2 different concepts. Yes, we do, but I think we can just be very loose here, just to use migrants or diaspora when it comes to remittance. I'm not going to discuss the concept and what are inside, but we just when we mention migrants or diaspora here, we are just mentioning the remittance senders, those who send remittance and to support their family back home or to support some other friends back home. Back to the questions now. I think Jibril, you have made a very interesting presentation. We have so many proposals that you have here. The first question that we got was for you. It is for you mainly to elaborate further on how this collective remittance could work. What are the mechanisms that you have in mind? And then when you answer this question, please let us have how it could work in the short term, how actually it can work to mitigate the main issues, to help people that used to receive remittance to be able still to benefit from that. Having in mind also the presentation, the proposals from the World Bank, from Sonia, that we should not really consider those who used to receive remittance as not eligible for any support these days. Thank you. Jibril.
Thanks, Amadou. Right now, for most migrants and diaspora who remit, they send about 90 to 95% of their remittances directly to family and friends. And they respond anything around 5% or so to collective remittance calls. Usually these are organized and run by different diaspora organizations, hometown organizations, alumni associations, and other thematic associations. So you make a contribution to that. The beneficiaries of that money, you may not even know who they are. You just know the community of interest for which they are. Now, the suggestion now is we concentrate, those collective remittances are extremely important in terms of harvesting the overall community and national benefit of diaspora and of migrants. So now we have seen, of course, because of the problems of COVID-19, that a lot of that is happening. For example, to support particular communities, sometimes even families. So I've been following this, and I've seen calls for particular families who have become destitute immediately because of perhaps a member of family has died suddenly out of COVID and all of that. So we have many calls going on this. So it is happening organically, and we know that the diaspora will respond to it. Now, if we're going to take policy structures and the general mechanisms of government and partners to support it, including their funds, then you would get a fund whose purpose would be to announce and to invite, sorry, I'm getting an echo.
Yes.
Okay. To invite and promote these different collective remittance schemes to apply for match funding from this collective remittance support fund. So that would do a number of things. Number one, it would encourage those who are doing it to expand their activities, because whatever they collect, it will be supplemented depending on the size of the collective fund that is available. Second, those who wanted to do it and didn't get to the point of doing it would be motivated to do that. Thirdly, it does something else structurally, which is what I think is important. And Sonia mentioned in terms of former remittances, the importance of looking again at anti-money laundering and countering terrorist finance regulation. By the way, some of you who've heard me know that I have a very cynical and skeptical view about the whole AML and CFT regulations. I generally think most of it is red herring. It's not terribly relevant to diaspora. But what have we seen in COVID-19? Almost every rule book of public finance regulation is being broken by government, and everybody supports them, and rightly so. So I give you an example. In the UK, one of the companies, I know this direct experience, one of the companies I'm involved in, every company in the UK is being encouraged to apply for a loan, cash loan, 25% of their last year's turnover. And the rules are simple. You put the application, it's 2 pages of about 8 questions. You put it, the only thing that is being checked is the only thing that's relevant. Is it true that last year you were in business? Is it true that your turnover was this amount? And how do you prove it's true? Because you filed it. That is the only relevant example. They use it. That's why they are able to make a decision in 24 hours. And this is a business decision. It's backed by the British Business Bank. It's not a charitable or philanthropic enterprise. What it suggests for us is that there is a whole lot of heavy and redundant regulation. And we've been saying this for a long time relating to remittance. So coming back to this collective remittance fund, the test would be simple. 1, are you really collecting funds from the diaspora? 2, is it going to a low or middle income countries to support a community event? 3, how much did you raise? And all of this stuff order, are you legally registered as an organization? How many members you have? All of that become unnecessary regulation and you go to the fund. I'll pause there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jibril. We have other questions for you, but it is related to the long-term and the medium-term actions. Let me go back to Pedro. We know that this time a lot of remittance service providers could not operate, but we have among them one which are very known, and then they have a very good network, and you have been working with them for so long. It is about the post offices, and we have a question here for you. What about the post offices during this pandemic while cash-to-cash shops were closed? Could you please just elaborate on them? What can you share about this?
No, thank you, Amadou, for the question, and I will try to squeeze in also other things that I think are relevant. But yes, as essential services, they've been deemed. So in many countries, they won that battle, and therefore we're able to showcase the point that they're highly relevant for the remittances, outreach. And this is, of course, particularly true in rural areas. So yeah, that's what we've seen. We have 2 main projects in remittances. As you know, we run for 5 years a long program to identify best practices, what works, how can remittances really take advantage, or postal networks can really take advantage of remittances to reinvent themselves in a way. And in this time of crisis, that's what we've seen. Actually, we're about to launch a brief just on the case of postal with the key findings. But indeed, for not only the provision of services, they've been there. Of course, on the social distancing, they had some issues. They had to readapt in many cases. Those that unfortunately could not open. But indeed, it did showcase the importance, because they also supported and created collaboration with other service providers, particularly for the cash out, because that was the main problem. Many of them that send digitally. As I said, the issue is we can send digitally from the global north or whatever the sending side, but transferring this in cash, turning it into cash on the receiving point is just a simple yet very cumbersome problem. And the post have been able to support in that regard. They're also thinking about other programs. So of course in ICT, we were actually talking about the digital ID. And this is more rampant. Of course, is linked with so many other problems. It is not just on the ID, but the ID is what is believed one of the stepping stones to continue. Actually, through Prime, you asked me Prime at the beginning. We're launching a massive project in Africa pretty soon on digital ID. If you know, the Financial Action Task Force and the Alliance for Financial Inclusions have made some guidelines on this. For regulators, and we're pushing for this, and also the postal of course application of it, and we're designing right now also in Uganda potential linkages for insurance provision. I take this opportunity as well to say we are releasing next week something on insurance and agriculture, because this is the most sought product.
So what do you want exactly?
And I'm sorry?
Sonia.
So what do you want?
Sonia.
Give me 2 minutes.
Okay. Sorry, Sonia. Could you mute your phone, your mic?
So this on products, I take the opportunity to mention also on the needs for products that are of high relevance, particularly for preparedness. The providing the resilience is, I think, the main point right now. Can I just take 1 minute to comment on what Gibril has mentioned?
Please
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Gibril, I fully agree, you know, with but I think what is important to think is what we have at hand. What we have at hand is a disposition of migrants and diasporas, even that don't remit, to support the communities back home, being the one with any country of Africa there. That is so strong and it's been there. And if they have no help in doing it, they will do it. It will even be hand carried if they have to. So and we have a demand, we have a supply and demand. And what is always needed is, of course, the road in between. It can be it can be just a trail, it can be a paved way, or it can be a highway. The problem is to try to reach for that highway and what is needed. And I've also been working on this for 20 years, and we've financed a lot of programs on crowdfunding, on investments. And the more we see, what we see is that middle mechanism, is that the middle mind is, can we facilitate the life of diasporas? I want to support my community. Can you give me a safe, de-risk way of doing it? And not something, and by that is crisis free. Right now, if I would like to invest in one sector, I'm sure that somebody could help me in doing that, and not to have to work on Saturdays and Sundays or extra to make it happen. And this is a market that you can easily compare with the impact investment market that is growing, that has a lot of instruments right now, but yet we have an impact investment that is interested in a return with a social impact, and you have a diaspora that is interested in a social impact and some investment, some return if possible. So you have these two worlds really not that meeting, and I think that there's a cross-learning on the tools that are absolutely necessary. Otherwise, sadly enough, the notion is by governments, decision makers, and institutions that finance these things to support, by thinking that, well, how scaled can this be? You know, because if it is in the hundreds of millions of dollars, they take it seriously. If it is not, then unfortunately they think that it's, you know, it cannot really get to scale, which is a wrong assumption. That's my opinion. But nevertheless, over and over, we've seen that this is true. So I think it's important. The AML, what you mentioned, I fully agree with many of the things. The problem is not what you, Gibril, or I think. I think it's what the governments think. And that's the dialogue, I think, that needs yet to continue. I mentioned the example at the beginning about crowdfunding. There's laws that simply put your limits on that and make it just simply very, very difficult. But anyway, I just wanted to highlight that. I hope I contributed rather than complicating more. Sorry, from the postal, I went a little bit further. Indeed, Amadou, there's a lot of talks. There's a lot of discussion points, and that's very interesting. Sorry, thank you.
That's fine, thank you. That's fine. It was also good that you address react on what Gibril had already said. We have seen in the different presentations that you have all of you have talked about policies. You have talked about the need to put in place some sound policies. And we know that policies can be one of the success factors of policies. It is the availability of data. Pedro, you've mentioned that in your presentation, the lack of data. It is very important that we close that gap. But we have today a situation where migrants are themselves even affected. How badly are they affected? Do you have any data about that? What are the things? I would like you, Pedro, to come to that. The issue of to be able for us to assess how the migrants are affected, who have lost their job, who has lost their lives, because it gives some idea about how remittance is going to evolve in the coming days. And also the other thing is that we have mentioned that many outlets were closed down. They were not functioning during this period. However, we still have data on the cost of that. How did World Bank come up with that data? I would like both of you to try to help us in how, from the European descending side, we are compiling data and then get some figure on the exact to help us to understand the situation, please.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Amadou. On terms of data, that's why we have called this. That's why I'm making this call to join us on Nomad on improving the data collection on remittances. But we are doing from two sides. Okay, one side is we are collecting data from the diaspora to really make the assessment. Nobody knows. Before we didn't have even data of how the diaspora was doing. We have very basic data, and now we don't have the assessment. Certain embassies or some consulators are getting the data. But first of all, in terms of how many are dead and how many are sick, let's remember who are being the most impacted. Migrants, okay? And just to give you an example, this happened also when it was the European flu, when it was the Spanish flu. All the migrants who died in New York on the Spanish flu, guess who were there? Who were the ones who died? Italians in New York, a lot, because they were the migrants. And now, if you see the statistics, who are dying? In Sweden, a lot of the Somalians. In UK, a lot of the Nigerians. In New York, several Peruvians. I'm counting my Peruvians compatriotas. Several of the Latin Americans. In a lot of parts, Salvadorians, Mexicans, several migrants. And why? There are three reasons. First of all, they don't have access to health services. Second of all, some of them that are undocumented, they don't want to go to the hospital because they are scared. And third of all, they have underlying conditions in a sense they haven't been good take care of the health. So this is a very interesting case. Now, another case, and I'm going to raise it in this group, sometimes is discrimination. We have been seeing in the health sector that we are choosing that the old people, even the old people, will not receive treatment because they are in the last part. We have seen in Italy, we are doing now in Peru. If you are over 60 and you're with COVID, you are not accepted in the hospital because there are no more beds. So you're doing that. What happens now in the countries is, even if you are a resident or you are a citizen of the country, for example, a Peruvian in Spain, you can have the citizenship. What happens is that they are giving preference to their own country, the natives, before any dual citizenship. Okay? So we are seeing all these conditions. So I think in terms of data, two things. We are working on with certain surveys in the countries that all the returnees. There's a lot of countries that migrants that are returning. So are taking, we are doing that surveys. Then we are working also with the diaspora to have a quick assessment of what is going on and which are being impacted. We are doing some surveys also in the ones that are going to the field, example in Pakistan, they're going to the field on labor market to see the impact, and we are doing some also in Kerala in India, and with the Somalia. So we are working in several countries to have a rapid pulse survey on impact on the labor market, on the diaspora, on impact on the remittances from the side of the remittances and sending, and then on the return migrants in that kind of sense. We are going to be working also with some of the consulates in collect the data on how many are dying and how many are registered. Some of them they're reporting, some of them not. So that's in that case. And on the remittances prices, our colleagues are also conducting every 2 weeks this pulse survey on the remittances service providers and the remittance prices to see what's going on, to monitoring. From that side also we are collecting that data. And then finally on the call to action, happy to see that Nomad is a contributor of this call to action that was mentioned before, that Switzerland and the UK are launching. And I think it's an important call to action that everybody joins. We have a lot of the states join. joining. It's important that everybody joins in an effort to promote the reduction of remittance and promote and facilitate remittances, because this is key at this moment. It cannot be possible that a person cannot be even sending $20 and it takes a lot of time to receive it, or in the other side, people need to have a digital wallet or a digital mobile money, and then you can expect a person of 60 or 80 years old that is going to be able to be manage that. No, there's a lot of family left behind, especially our parents or the friends of our parents that are being left behind, which are the ones who receive the remittances, and they will not have access to those technologies. So that's for my side. Thank you.
De la disponibilité. Donc voilà un peu ce que j'avais à dire sur cette question. Je vous remercie.
Merci beaucoup.
So much. Thank you so much, Pedro. While answering the same questions that is related to the data, let me just take this opportunity to answer one of the participants. We are not saying that we want to collect data on migrants because we want just to focus remittance. No, it's beyond that. Because for us, having data on our migrants would help us, migrants and diaspora if you wish, will help us to design accurate, sound policies. But for the meantime, in the short term, we need that to understand how bad is the situation and what are the mitigation measures that can be taken in the now. Pedro, please.
Thank you, Amadou. I'll just will complement a lot. I think Sonia just mentioned the source of data where this can be done. I think there's been a lot of surveys. We're also running surveys for the diaspora to try to understand more the situation. This is also why at the beginning I didn't paint a rosy picture on what we're seeing. We might see not less effects in some areas, but in the other, we can correlate this with the remittances industry is saying. And it's not just, problem of the month. A lot of remittances are not being driven, and a lot of migrants are responding to the fact that there's a lot of uncertainty about the future. So this is not exaggerated. It is a reality that we've seen. But now the issue that we all compared, in this task force, we're 35. And we all agree that what we do have access, and this from each sector, including the diaspora groups, is we have a lot of sporadic and anecdotal evidence of whatever we discuss. And this is a main issue, and we all agree that it's needed to be able to take better action. We need that. I can say for the diaspora, discussing with ADEPT here, we actually did a survey with Senegalese to try to understand the issues, also their aspirations, and not only their needs, but we would like is to also get vice versa with the diaspora groups. How can they support basically in the generation of this data? I believe it's actually a recommendation that is coming out now in this work group and this Remittances Community Task Force, this dual engagement to get better data for the dual purpose. I think it's important. On the remittances sector, there's a lot of data needed about which outlet is open. So there's a call from the remittances community on the private sector to call for this. Let's generate, and there's ideas of doing that, to bring that information to bear. Which is open, which outlets are not, what type of services. Something that can be also, of course, accessible to the customers themselves, not just on the price. We've done a lot in many years for price, but here is mainly on services and the use of these services. And the private sector is very keen in pushing for this, and I think they would need support from the public sector initially to implement that. I think studying the market itself, the World Bank, the remittances price database does a pretty good job every 2 weeks to give us a sense of where the market is doing. The government is basically also trying with a certain delay to understand the number of flows. So everything that we see, we need to take it also with a grain of salt, because that's the best thing available. But nevertheless, there's nothing instantaneous in this regard. So, but I wanted, for the purpose of this meeting, call really into the diaspora groups information on the information that they can achieve, or the information that they will be willing to get is of utmost importance. The diaspora groups can be a great generation of data that can help governments, that can help also public sector or international organizations in better supporting. The embassies do their job. I know Nomad, we search by that, but we all know about all the data, what are the weaknesses. So the more I think, the better. But my only caution would be all the data that we see has some delay to it when complete, and when incomplete, well, it's just incomplete. So better on this is great. For the prices, one more thing is to avoid the delay. For instance, on Remittances is a platform that we're launching. We're doing web scrapping, which basically is with the use of artificial intelligence is grabbing right now on the specific sectors, the mechanisms of sending, and that can give you, again, as a thermometer to try to see where the tendencies are. And I think this could be applied to many other sources of data, including for migrants. We're working on apps as well that allow us this. All the findings of everybody that is doing this thing should come out in order to help us all be more reactive, particularly in these times of crisis. And I don't know if this is going to be the last time I talk, so I just want to make one call if possible. June 16, this is the time where everybody, I think, should promote their contribution for the International Day of Family Remittances. It's a UN day. There's a lot of good opportunities. There's a lot of actions, and I think it's fantastic. And I think this, where we can try to change the minds that have yet to be changed, to address these very important issues, to really bring the scale of this phenomenon to bear. So we can only encourage everyone to do their share in supporting and making their views seen. Thank you. Thank you, Amadou.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Let's move on to the action, medium and long-term actions. Among them, Jibril, you have listed a lot of actions that could be undertaken. And you have a question here with regard to the matching fund that you mentioned, mainly the use of the ODA. There are some issues that somebody mentioned here. It is Nicola, who said that ODA is increasingly being politicized and intended to support foreign policy objectives of donor governments, but remittances are not politicized and are largely consumptive. What are the chances that ODA can match remittance from the diaspora? Could you please answer that question?
Yes, the starting point would be to say that for remittance mite funding, my first call is for it to come not from ODA, but other government sources. That would be the starting point. But the reason why it may still be justified within ODA is because we are seeing in the politicization also the dilution of ODA from the original strict humanitarian and developmental characteristics of it. You may remember that in the past, I think it's about 18 months ago, the UK was even threatening ODA, OECD, that it would go to the DAC and make some strong presentation so that it can use its ODA money for the purposes it wanted. For the UK in particular, the ODA that goes to, because we've got the 0.7% of GDP rule, that's a law now in the UK. So the 13 to 15 billion that comes out of that, which should generally speaking be totally for DFID to use, we are already seeing what we call horizontal spending. A lot of that being siphoned out to foreign affairs, to home affairs, to even to defense. That's happening. So however you cut it, the money is dissipating, it's disappearing in other ways. So our argument that it can be justified for it to come, this funding to come from ODA would be that, because that ODA money is disappearing anyway to things that are not strictly development in that. But yes, I take the point. The first starting point is to ask for that money out of ODA. The overall question of is this feasible? That question can only be answered when the deal is done. But because it's an ongoing advocacy until you get the deal done, and then you have to continue engaging with the government to make sure that it remains. Thanks.
Thank you so much for that. Still, we have a few. Let's also relay another question for you about this. Still, if you could, yes, we have here a question from yes, Marina. Marina, who is asking that, what do you think that should be the region where, or the country or the region where we could test the remit aid that you talk about, the project?
Okay, thanks, Marina, for that. And that question is now, as we said, the remit aid idea of remittance funding is now linked to the whole African Union's Diaspora Investment Fund program. And I think Iman is still on the call if she wants to add something to it. Where the AU is now, I think there are internal discussions to go to the next stage of implementation. But I have shared with all of the participants a link to the AU website that has the abridged version of the report for the Diaspora Investment Fund framework. The work we did with the AU and other partners was to take the idea, analyze it, and develop a mechanism through which we think it can happen. And that's now roughly being called the African Diaspora Finance Corporation. That answers all of the major questions of feasibility. Is it practically possible? Viability. Is it worthwhile to do it from a development point of view and all other measures? So it exists there as a framework, and the AU is working on how to implement that. And can I take the opportunity to mention, thanks Pedro for reminding us that these discussions, volume also matters. And yes, for the AU discussions of the Diaspora Investment Fund, those elements of volume are there. And the thinking is that to access these monies, we're not talking only for the diaspora and their investment, but you include friends of the diaspora and you include impact investment funds as well. That allows you to be talking about hundreds of millions rather than few millions here and there. It allows you to capitalize on that. Second point linked to the fund is also really bringing it very as close as possible to the innovative finance framework that already exists. And there are brilliant examples, very successful happening, and we are trying to learn from those and incorporate them. For the AU itself, in November last year, it convened its first major consultative meeting in this. Amadou actually chaired some of the discussions in that forum in Cairo, and I'm sure in the implementation phase, more consultations and research and negotiations would happen. And the last point comes back to the point of regulation generally. And for me, this really came home to me in 2006, 2007, when the EU was negotiating for its first Payment Services Directive. And although academically I knew it, but I was amazed seeing firsthand that this regulation, this was not science. It was not necessarily the science of what was the best regulation. It was a balance of the competing interest groups. We saw there the major West money transfer companies lobbying so hard at the highest possible level to get the threshold so very high, which necessarily would have kicked out many small operators, would have dampened down innovation. And so some of the things they were saying, we need this for regulation, it turned out it was not science. And I must say in that case, Her Majesty's Treasury from the UK effectively took the lobby on behalf of smaller players, and a degree of gradation was brought in, because the regulator is looking for a hammer, one hammer to sort out to do all jobs. At the end, the hammer they take may be too big for some players and too small for others. And my query always is, why am I always the victim of regulation? Why am I not the beneficiary of regulation? And that's why the regulatory bit involves. In this case, at the end, there were exemptions given to some operators to allow them to come in. And I think that sort of discourse is still relevant, especially when we are looking for new innovations. In remittances, we have seen it's been developing for over 15 years now, but it's taken up big time in the past year or so, where now people are sending money, but money is not delivered. So, but it's not necessarily going to a digital wallet. They are delivering goods and services. And that bit, there's still a lot of room for innovation, and one must not allow the regulation to kill it off or to strangle it at birth. Thanks.
Thank you so much. The regulation, which is very key, but I think, as you mentioned, we cannot apply the same regulation to all of the players. We should have some different layers. And about that, there are some minimums, there are some standards that we think that we should try to address. And it's not only for remittance itself, but it is for other issues, the general issues. It is about the digital ID. Because for the safety, security, and the safety for everyone, we should advance this agenda for the digital ID. Some countries, you don't have any ID, identification. And you know, in the market, one key element is how to ensure customer protection. If you don't know who is the customer, how are you going to protect him? And this goes through the availability of digital ID. And this project has been, supported. And then I would like Sonia to really elaborate further on what the World Bank is doing to really support the countries that do not have any ID system, to put in place that ID system that goes beyond the remittance market. Please elaborate on that. But also, if you have the floor, we were informed recently that the FATF, they were often, and they were even trying they had planned to do that, to really look at the recommendations when it comes to the remittance service providers. So then to have lighter regulation on that. The other thing is that the World Bank is working with many countries about what we call the payment system providers. So the regulation of the payment system. If that happens and you have the payment service providers that are really regulated, would it be also, it would be, I think, part of the solution of the remittance market. Could you please elaborate on those issues that the World Bank is very involved in?
Thank you, Amadou. Thank you very much. I completely concord on the issue of digital ID and ID in general. The World Bank has an initiative, ID for Development, that is promoting IDs, foundational IDs, not only for remittance, but foundational IDs, which is for registration, birth certificate, marriage, and access to health. So the foundational ID, and based on that foundational ID, we elaborate and we establish different aspects. Now, however, sometimes it's difficult to start with the whole, we develop the unique identifier and we do a foundational ID. But let's put the example of Somalia. We cannot wait until the whole foundational ID is in place. So we are doing and developing a digital financial ID, which will be based on the financial ID that is being parallel served. So we are working on that initiative. There's another initiative also to have a digital ID on the West Africa, which is a regional approach. And there's also another initiative to do in East Africa and communities. So we're working with a lot of those countries to have a regional ID and a digital ID. It's difficult, first of all, because of the technology. And then be very clear on what is the biometric and be very clear how we are going to establish that and then put all the things. Now, one thing that is important and that you mentioned, Amadou, is I'm going to give the example on the refugees in Uganda. The refugees in Uganda, and this is a call for everybody, all the international organizations go to a country and they issue ID. Nigeria have at some point 4 or 5 IDs because UNHCR has issued an ID, IOM has issued another ID, the government has an ID, and I don't know who else must find an ID. What we're trying to say also from the World Bank and everybody is there has to be a one, and there has to be a harmonization on IDs, and the platform works in one. It's not helpful for anybody to have several IDs at the same time. That's one. And the second one is, for example, in the case of Uganda, UNHCR issues an ID, which some biometric or not. However, that ID is not being recognized as the national ID. Can we do something to harmonize? We are working on that harmonization so people can get access to these mobile payments, and then the same people that are also happening in Kenya. So that's what we're doing. And then you are right, in terms of the digital ID and the consumer protection and customer protection, there's a lot of problems. And we have to work on that because what happens is the people receive the money and they give the phone to another person because they don't understand. Or they give the SIM card to another person, they don't understand, and then the money is stalled, the funds are stalled, a lot of things. So we have to do more on consumer protection. On terms of the FATF, I think that for FATF we need to work again on data because several of the countries that are facing the MLCFT is because they don't have the data. So that's why we're saying it's very important that from now we start working on collecting this quantitative and qualitative data so the FATF and the national review assessments and the FATF reviews come very good, in a very good form. We need to start working, and for that we need to work together with the UK Treasury, US Treasury, and all the regulators so we have the right information. What Pedro was saying, how much is for different channels? Yeah, for different channels, for jurisdictions, everything. Nobody's collecting that data, nobody has that. And then also we need the data on how many sanctions have you persecuted, have the supervision has been conducted well on the remittance service provided, have debt submitted. Yes. And then the FATF was considering some lighter regulations, but it's going to be very hard still. We were in conversations also with the MENA FATF to see if we can have lighter regulations. They were trying, but it's a lot of opposition. So I don't think that we will get that. The most important thing is that we can prove with the data that we are improving and putting some more regulations. On the payment system providers, I was yesterday in a discussion of this regional South Africa payment platform, not South Africa, Southern Africa, and to have a global continental Africa platform. It cannot be possible that the payment platform in East Africa doesn't talk to the payment platform in West Africa, no? And all the money has to go to Europe and then come back to make a payment. So I think that this is a role for the African Union as well on how we can facilitate these payment systems providers infrastructure. We are working with our clients to the ones that they don't have switch systems to the most advanced. We are working with them to have the most advanced payment platform. But the thing that we have to work is in the regularity and the regulations and the interoperability and access to everybody, because what we're seeing is there are payment platforms, but they're not giving access to the new companies that are coming with new technologies. Or you only work on this group, but we don't allow the other ones. So we have to be open the payment platform for everybody, and then also there has to be interoperability with the mobile companies. The mobile companies also have to be supervised on the regulation, and we have to be doing that. But one point that I wanted to make, given that I have the floor, is the policy incoherence. Okay, there's still a lot of policy incoherence in our countries, and let me give you an example. We are trying to promote digital remittances on one side, and the other side, for certain governments, taxing mobile money transactions is very easy. So they are taxing mobile money transactions, okay? For other countries, they say, oh, it's easier to tax, let's tax the outflows of remittances or let's tax the inflows of remittances. And we have to advocate for this not to happen, because this is the east now that the countries, they don't have fiscal space. That's the first route that they're going to be going, no? So let's work on those regulatory measures that you were mentioning on how to facilitate the payment systems, how to facilitate the continental trade payment systems in Africa. It cannot be possible From South Africa to Zimbabwe, 18%, okay? And then you cannot have that platform. It's so simple to work on those regulations. So that's my comments from my side. A lot of projects on ID4D, digital ID on Somalia. I'm involved in that one. I have done also the study for East Africa on the regional ID that we facilitate, not only remittances, but trade. I think that this is key. And then how we can do the foundational. And then the other thing that it's important is for the cash transfers. There's no registry now for the cash transfers, and you don't know to whom you are going to give them, because a lot of people don't have the ID. So we should have started working before, but even if we have not started working before, we have to strengthen the systems also for the country. Thank you. Over.
Thank you, Sonia. I would like to apologize to our participants that we are supposed to have closed this 5 minutes ago. We would like you just to give us 5 minutes so then we conclude these very interesting discussions. I know that the topic is very wide. We could not discuss all the issues, and then probably during the next webinar, that will be, I think, where we'll have the presentation from Sonia on remittance again. So you will be able to carry on. But let me, before we finish, we come back to Africa. Jibril, I will bring you to Africa. Like I said, we are going to use mainly your heart as a migrant. So you have a question here when you mentioned the issue of the health system. So could you please reply to this question, that the point on supporting health system using remittance, what could you please just elaborate on that, and then mainly looking at the governance issues that it was mentioned, please.
Well, just a brief answer. First, partly, I think was mentioned by Sean here. That is to use the diaspora's contribution to health insurance projects. Mm-hmm. This was first discussed about 10, 15 years ago, and now we're seeing small examples here and there. And the reason why this is feasible is even for the most underdeveloped of countries, generally speaking, there's an insurance mechanism mainly targeted for third-party transport, motor vehicle insurance, but it means that there's insurance regulations and laws. So, and health insurance projects have been developed. Some countries, the governments are doing it themselves. So it is possible to expand that in a manner whereby the diaspora can contribute. This is still linked to remittances. It's only that now the remitter has the ability to separate out their remittances more so than 15 years ago. 15 years ago, you send all of it to your uncle and they decide, they choose, this part goes for school fees, this part goes for household. Now, you can send directly to insurance, school fees, or you ask your money transfer company to deliver the food. So that, I would say, the health insurance model is a good one. But a related point, which is not necessarily financial remittance, but social or skills remittance, is the capacity that we now have through technology for telemedicine, whereby the doctors and the medics in the diaspora, right now, many of them would put together their holidays and then go once a year and spend a month doing work. Telemedicine allows for them to, you get the point.
Allow me just to take back the floor, because 10 minutes is very important for people. Some had already some other commitments. I don't know if Pedro is still with us, because he had some other commitments and we are keeping him here. Please, no. Pedro, could you have your last words? What
it's just
like
more of a thank you. Well, thank you. This is a very good initiative. This is what I'm trying to say. Let's not kill the momentum. More of this, I think it's perfect. My apologies. I just have another Zoom meeting. We have 20 people waiting on the other side, and I'm supposed to initiate it. So I'm deeply sorry of that. And I will, if it's okay, we would like to share more information as well. If this could be shared around, that would be great. So thank you all. It was a pleasure to talk to Sonia, Gabriel, yourself. Really, Thank you so much, and we talk soon.
Thank you, Pedro. Before you go, let me just echo what you have said, and to all the participants, the next, it is June 2016. Please don't forget it. It is about 16. The Remittance Family Day. Yes. Thank you.
It's our day to all of us, so please, it's the role of everybody to put out what we believe should be there. So just advocating for that. Thank you so much. Bye.
Thank you so much. Sonia, we are very sorry to wake you up so early because you're in the US. Could we have your last words, please?
Okay, very short. Thank you for everybody. We have a broad agenda. For me, the question is, let's do it. Because what Jibril has said 10, 15 years ago, we have been thinking about this, okay? But this is the right moment in the crisis that we move forward with this agenda in concrete on the health, on the food security, on the new financial products for insurance, stock insurance, health insurance. And then don't forget that we have to reskill and upskill, because if we are moving to telemedicine, if we are moving to commerce, we're moving to digital, the diaspora and the local people also have to skill. That's my comments, and Nomad is happy to collaborate. And please look at the call to action. It's live now, the webpage.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Jibril, back to you. Your last words for this, we thank you so much, but your last words for this webinar, with regard to, we know your position about the AML-CFT, but also what you said about the cash, that is cash is still king and is going to be king for a long time. So all the solutions that we have to put in place, whether being short-term, long-term, should also take into account that many people use cash because of different reasons. Thank you, but also can we have your last words?
My last word is just to agree with everybody and to thank you all for convening this, and to say, right as we conclude, I'm slightly less depressed than when we began with Sonia and her statistics. So I think, yes, thanks to AFFORD and ADEPT for organizing this. I think it's a series we should be able to catch up again. And I'll echo Sonia's word. Let's just grasp the nettle now and get on with it. And thanks, Amadou and Iman, for your hosting us here. Thanks.
Thank you so much. We have all mentioned it, but also ourselves as organization, the World Bank, the AFFORD, and ourselves, we should also echo the work that AFFORD is doing. Really, we have to support them, AFFORD and ADEPT, all of them. These initiatives, I think they are worth for us to support them and to help them and to collaborate together. You have mentioned it. It's about collaboration. It is about cooperation, because at the end of the day, we are doing that for our migrants, for our people. That's the final objectives. Maybe before we close, let's go back to our host today. Thank you so much, Stella. If you are around, Karin, thank you. Could you have the floor?
Thank you so much, Amadou, for the moderation. Thank you, everyone who stayed on this to listen to the conversation and to input as well. And thanks to all the speakers, Ayman and Pedro and Sonia and Jibril. It's been really, really brilliant, and we really appreciate the time that you've spent as well. For the participants, just to mention very quickly that there will be a report. We will also share the information that you've seen as well. I think Sonia and Jibril have shared some information, but we will send that around as well so that we have that all, as well as the information on the International Family Day of Remittances. And there will be a recording. If we were not able to get to your questions, really sorry, please do send your questions through to ddd@adept-platform.org, and we will make sure to come back to you. But otherwise, just to say thank you on behalf of the partnership, which is AU-CIDO, ADEPT, and AFFORD. Thanks to everyone for joining us, and we will see you hopefully again at the third one in a couple of weeks or so. Thank you very much.